Imagine being humiliated in front of a plane full of passengers just because of your skin color. That's exactly what happened to this black woman until she revealed her true identity, and everyone was stunned. On a routine first-class flight, a flight attendant singled out a well-dressed black woman, claiming she didn't belong in the premium cabin. Loud comments and rude gestures followed as the attendant insisted she move to the back. Passengers were shocked, but no one stepped in to help. The woman remained calm, despite the insults, but there was something no one, not even the arrogant attendant, knew about her. She wasn't just any passenger. This wasn't going to end the way the flight attendant expected. What happened next not only changed the flight attendant's life, but left the entire plane in disbelief. The flight was almost full, and the first-class cabin had a calm, luxurious atmosphere. That is until the flight attendant walked down the aisle with a look of irritation. She stopped abruptly at seat 2A, where a poised black woman sat quietly, scrolling through her phone. The woman was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit with a designer bag tucked neatly under her seat. To most people, she looked like she belonged there, but not to this flight attendant. "Excuse me," the attendant said, her tone sharp and condescending. "This is first class. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The woman glanced up, her expression calm but firm. "Yes, I'm in the right seat." 2A. The attendant's lips tightened into a thin line. She crossed her arms and said louder, "I'm going to need to see your ticket." Passengers nearby began to shift uncomfortably, their curiosity piqued. The black woman handed over her boarding pass without a word, her calm demeanor unwavering. The attendant snatched it from her hand, inspected it with exaggerated scrutiny, and then, almost reluctantly, handed it back. "Fine," the attendant muttered, but instead of moving on, she added, "I just needed to check because, well, people sometimes sit where they don't belong." That comment hit like a slap across the face, and you could see the discomfort ripple through the cabin. Some passengers turned away, pretending not to hear, while others exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke up. No one challenged the flight attendant's words. The black woman maintained her composure, but anyone paying attention could see the subtle change in her expression. She was no stranger to this kind of treatment, but that didn't make it any less humiliating. The flight attendant, emboldened by the lack of protest from the passengers, didn't stop there. She began inspecting the woman's belongings, her bag, her coat, even the way she sat, like she was searching for a reason to justify her behavior. "You know," the attendant said loudly, as if addressing the entire cabin, "we have very strict policies about who can sit in first class. Some people think they can just upgrade themselves without paying." The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but laced with steel. "Are you suggesting that I don't belong here?" The attendant smirked. "I'm just saying it's unusual, that's all." At this point, whispers started spreading through the cabin. Some passengers whispered in sympathy, others in judgment. A man seated across the aisle leaned over to his wife and murmured, "I don't know why she's making such a scene. It's embarrassing." But the real embarrassment wasn't the black woman's. It was the flight attendant's. Yet no one seemed willing to point that out. The tension in the cabin was palpable. The flight attendant walked away briefly, but it wasn't over. She returned a few minutes later, holding a clipboard and looking smug. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to move to the back. We've got a situation with seating, and we need this seat for someone else." The woman didn't budge. "My ticket is for 2A, and I'm not moving." The attendant's tone grew sharper. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security." At this point, all eyes were on the two women. The passengers who had been whispering now sat in stunned silence, waiting to see what would happen. Some looked away, clearly uncomfortable, while others seemed almost eager for the confrontation to escalate. The black woman's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the flight attendant's growing hostility. And yet, through it all, the woman never raised her voice, never lost her cool. She simply sat there, unyielding, as if daring the flight attendant to do her worst. This wasn't just about a seat in first class anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and the deeply ingrained prejudices that too often go unchallenged. The black woman's quiet defiance was a statement in itself, a refusal to be humiliated, a refusal to be erased. But the flight attendant wasn't done. What she didn't know was that she was about to make a mistake so monumental it would turn the entire flight upside down. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew heavier with every passing second. The black woman, composed and resolute, sat firmly in her assigned seat. Meanwhile, the flight attendant paced the aisle, her irritation evident as she whispered into her radio. Passengers watched in tense silence, unsure of what would happen next. Minutes later, the attendant returned with a smug expression, as if she had just devised the perfect plan. She leaned in closer to the woman, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent those nearby from hearing. "I've spoken to the captain, and he's authorized me to have you removed if you don't cooperate." The woman raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Removed? For sitting in the seat I paid for?" "Yes," the flight attendant snapped, her frustration boiling over. "You're causing a disturbance and refusing to comply with crew instructions." The absurdity of the accusation wasn't lost on the passengers. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. "She's not causing a scene," one passenger murmured to his wife. "The attendant is." Another chimed in, louder this time. "She's literally just sitting there." But the flight attendant was oblivious to the growing discontent. In her mind, she was in complete control. She gestured toward the woman's belongings. "Gather your things, ma'am. We'll escort you to the back of the plane." The woman didn't move. Instead, she reached for her phone and began typing, her fingers moving with purpose. The attendant's patience snapped. "You can't use your phone right now. Turn it off." The woman didn't even glance up. "I'm sending an important message. Give me a moment." Her calm defiance only fueled the attendant's anger. "That's it," she hissed, stepping back as if preparing for the final blow. "I'm calling security." The announcement sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Passengers exchanged incredulous looks. One man, sitting a few rows back, finally spoke up. "Are you seriously going to have her removed for sitting in her assigned seat? This is ridiculous." The flight attendant shot him a glare. "Sir, please stay out of this. It's being handled." But was it really? The tension was no longer contained to just the two women. It was spilling into the entire cabin, and people were starting to take sides. Some passengers muttered in agreement with the man, while others looked down, avoiding eye contact, unwilling to get involved. Meanwhile, the black woman remained a picture of composure. She finished her message and placed her phone back in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Go ahead," she said to the attendant. "Call security if you feel that's necessary." The flight attendant hesitated, caught off guard by the woman's calm demeanor. But instead of reconsidering, she doubled down. Turning sharply on her heel, she marched toward the front of the plane, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. It didn't take long for security to arrive. Two airline staff members, both visibly uneasy, approached the woman's seat. "Ma'am," one of them began hesitantly, "we've been asked to address a seating issue. May we see your boarding pass?" The woman handed it over without a word. They inspected it, and their expressions shifted from confusion to embarrassment. One of them looked toward the flight attendant, who stood nearby, arms crossed and smug. "She's in her assigned seat," he said quietly. "There's no issue here." The flight attendant's face reddened. "But she's being uncooperative and disruptive," she insisted, her voice rising. One of the security staff shook his head. "She hasn't done anything wrong." "Ma'am," he said, turning back to the woman, "we apologize for the inconvenience. You're free to stay in your seat." The flight attendant's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was losing control of the situation, and it showed. The passengers, sensing the shift in power, began whispering louder. A few even clapped quietly, though it wasn't clear whether it was in support of the woman or in frustration with the attendant. But the story wasn't over. As the security staff prepared to leave, the black woman spoke up for the first time in a tone that carried the weight of authority. "Before you go, I'd like you to wait here. There's someone I need to speak with." Her words were cryptic but commanding, and the cabin fell silent once again. The flight attendant's confidence wavered. Something was happening, and she didn't have control over it anymore. Moments later, the cabin doors opened, and an impeccably dressed man stepped inside. His presence was commanding, and the airline staff immediately straightened up. The flight attendant's face turned pale. She recognized him instantly, and her smug expression crumbled. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension as the impeccably dressed man strode down the aisle. His tailored suit and polished demeanor made it clear he was someone important. Passengers leaned in, whispering to one another. Their curiosity piqued. The flight attendant, once brimming with arrogance, now stood frozen, her confidence draining by the second. "Mr. Hayes," she stammered, her voice suddenly small. What are you doing here?" The man, ignoring her question, directed his sharp gaze at the black woman in seat 2A. His expression softened into one of respect and concern. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, his tone polite but authoritative, "is everything all right? I came as soon as I received your message." The shift in energy was palpable. Whispers erupted throughout the cabin as passengers pieced together the puzzle. Who was this woman? Why did the man, clearly a figure of authority, address her so formally? The black woman looked up, calm and composed as always, and offered a slight nod. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Hayes," she said. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The flight attendant, desperate to salvage the situation, forced a nervous laugh. "Oh, it's nothing serious, Mr. Hayes. Just a small mix-up with seating. I was simply following protocol." "Protocol?" Mr. Hayes interrupted, his voice sharp. "Your protocol involves humiliating a paying passenger and attempting to have her removed from her rightful seat?" The flight attendant's face turned crimson. I didn't mean." "I'm not interested in excuses," Mr. Hayes cut her off. He turned to the passengers, addressing them with calm professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. My name is Richard Hayes, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of this airline." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Passengers exchanged stunned glances, their attention shifting between Mr. Hayes and the black woman in seat 2A. "Mrs. Anderson," Mr. Hayes continued, his tone respectful, "is not just any passenger. She is one of the principal owners of this airline. Her contributions have shaped the very company you're flying with today." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The flight attendant's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her smug arrogance had dissolved entirely, replaced by sheer panic. Passengers who had previously stayed silent now murmured loudly, their disdain for the flight attendant clear. Mrs. Anderson met the attendant's panicked gaze with quiet strength. "You assumed I didn't belong here because of how I look," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, disregarded my rights, and escalated the situation unnecessarily. All because you saw me as less than you." The flight attendant took a shaky step back, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean any harm. I just thought." "That's the problem," Mrs. Anderson interjected, her tone cutting but controlled. "You didn't think, and in your rush to judge me, you've shown everyone here what kind of person you are." The cabin fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Mr. Hayes stepped forward. "Your actions today are unacceptable and do not align with our company's values," he said, addressing the flight attendant. "Consider this your last day with the airline." The flight attendant's knees seemed to buckle as the words landed. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Mr. Hayes silenced her. With a nod to the security staff, he added, "Please escort her off the plane." The attendant was led away, her head hung low, as passengers looked on in a mix of satisfaction and shock. Some clapped quietly, while others whispered to one another, still processing what had just happened. Mrs. Anderson, now the center of attention, stood gracefully and turned to the passengers. "Thank you for your patience," she said warmly. I hope this serves as a reminder that respect and dignity should be extended to everyone, regardless of appearance. She took her seat again, her composure unshaken. Mr. Hayes gave her a respectful nod before addressing the cabin once more. Let's get this flight back on track. Thank you for flying with us, and rest assured, we take incidents like this very seriously. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, the passengers sat in stunned silence, their respect for Mrs. Anderson growing with every passing moment. This was not just a story about injustice. It was a lesson in strength, grace, and the power of standing up for what's right. As the plane finally took off, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Mrs. Anderson's quiet strength left an indelible mark on every passenger, reminding them that respect knows no boundaries. The flight attendant's arrogance had cost her everything, serving as a stark lesson in humility. Meanwhile, Mrs. Anderson returned to her seat, embodying dignity and grace, proving that true power lies in composure and fairness. This wasn't just a story about prejudice. It was a lesson on why treating people with respect matters. Injustice might prevail momentarily, but integrity and truth will always win in the end. Want to see more stories that uncover shocking truths? Hit subscribe or watch the next video now.